battleship Arizona has not moved since the morning of December 7, 1941. 1,177 of her crew members were entombed inside forever. The ship's rusty hull under 40 feet of water is still leaking oil. A drop rises to the surface about every 20 seconds. It is sad and spooky, like a message silently floating up from an underwater tomb.
The Arizona itself continued to burn out of control for 2.5 days. The Arizona had sunk as a result of a direct hit into her forward magazines that had ignited over 1 million pounds of explosives. The memorial itself spans the wreck of the Arizona but doesn't touch it. It was placed here in 1961 and dedicated on Memorial Day 1962.
There's not much to see now but a sunken battleship, a reminder of a day of American national humiliation.
This is where the oil comes up. See, it's just spreading out there.
How could it have happened?
See, my anger rose ferociously to where I wanted to kill. And then I began to hate them. I wanted to see them wiped out. I rejoiced when we dropped that bomb on Hiroshima, because this is the way I felt toward the Japanese people. I was very angry.
Joe Morgan is one of a dozen survivors of the attack who now volunteer to work as guides at the Arizona Battleship Memorial. They tell war stories to the tourists, and then they tell more than that.
But the man who led the attack on Pearl Harbor apologized to me. And we became friends. And here is a picture of Captain Fuchida and yours truly shaking hands in front of the Lahaina Methodist Church in 1956.
Claire Cade, USS West Virginia.
I'm Lonnie Wells, the USS Maryland.
Tom Bates, the USS Ramsey.
You too can join the Pearl Harbor Survivors Association. The requirements are that you were anywhere on the island of Oahu or within 3 miles offshore on that morning. Coming to the 50th anniversary now, membership has climbed to 15,000 with chapters in every state.
And you were on the Maryland.
I was on the Maryland.
You saw quite a bit of the action.
Oh yeah, I was topside and director.
Some have made a sort of second career out of their brush with history. Their official duty is to remember and to tell others their war stories, write letters to editors and to Congress, and to keep alive the slogan, "Remember Pearl Harbor and keep America alert." Well, that has essentially been the American defense policy ever since.
皆さんと50年ぶりに笑顔のこの再会できたことは誠に喜ばしいこと。
It is good to see you after 50 years.
皆さんご健康で。
I wish you good health and happiness.
乾杯。
8 Japanese pilots who flew in the attack had an unusual meeting in October of this year, the first time they've been together since the war.
My name is Abe. I was on the Akagi. I was a dive bomber and the team leader.
My name is Kawahashi. I was with Abe. I was the second torpedo bomber to attack the American Pacific Fleet.
They have no formal organization, no reunions, no uniforms. They do not march in parades. They have almost never spoken of their wartime service because in the pervasive anti-military mood of modern-day Japan, war veterans keep to themselves. For several months, they planned a meeting with American Pearl Harbor survivors in Atlanta. But at the last minute, the ceremonies were canceled by the American Association's headquarters. Gerald Glaubitz, president of the Survivors Association, prohibited the meeting. Inappropriate, he says.
Everybody has said, well, why don't you forgive and forget? And there's several reasons. Number one, we were not at war. It was not a battle. It was a sneak attack in any way you want to name it. There was no warning whatsoever. If there had been, the ships had been underway, the planes had been in the air, and it would have been an entirely different thing.
Zenji Abe reads the statement he would have made at the meeting with the Atlanta Survivors Group.
We, 12 surviving pilots, were on Admiral Nagumo's fleet and took part in the Pearl Harbor attack. At that time, we were youthful, 20 years old. It was a battle that we had to pursue by the order of our senior officers, believing that this attack was for our own country. Therefore, originally, we didn't have any hatred against you, the American people, personally. The fact that we initiated the attack, inflicted heavy casualties at Pearl Harbor, and left indelible scars in the souls of so many of your survivors, pained our hearts deeply. This is my introduction. Nowhere did I ask for forgiveness or offer an apology.
Japanese memories of the war are focused almost exclusively on the place where the world's first atomic bomb fell. Hiroshima is seen by them as a badge of national suffering and victimization. Visitors are told the memorial flame will burn until all the world's nuclear weapons are eliminated. Of the 1.5 million visitors to Hiroshima each year, 95% are Japanese, and they hear the atomic bomb story from eyewitnesses.
They were so physically disfigured that you wouldn't be able to tell they were human beings. Their hair was gone, their eyes and ears were melted, the skin was dangling from their chins.
The Atomic Bomb Museum is a powerful statement of the anti-war sentiment dominating Japan in the post-war years. For many, the American atomic attack more than balances out the Pearl Harbor attack.
Once I was interviewed by an American broadcasting company. Toward the end, the interviewer asked me, "Do you know the slogan, 'Remember Pearl Harbor'?" So I said, "Yes, I know." I said, "Let me ask you a question. Do you remember Hiroshima and Nagasaki?" I asked him a question. He didn't answer. That's how it is.
People always try to equate Pearl Harbor with Hiroshima. The difference is, and I'm not discounting the horror of Hiroshima, the difference is that we were not at war. If we were at war and Pearl Harbor was attacked, we all should have been shot for negligence. But we were not at war. I can't tell you the outrage that was there, and it still exists today.
Oddly, Japanese tend to remember the atomic attack as suffering inflicted by the Americans, unconnected to the war or to Pearl Harbor, an attitude that infuriates Americans, who point out that without Pearl Harbor there would have been no Hiroshima. Today, the Pacific Fleet is still in Pearl Harbor, even if there is no threat anywhere in the Pacific. For 50 years, it has been a statement that this country will not be surprised again.
You learn not to suck yourself back into some splendid isolation and turn your back on the rest of the world. And of course, when we were attacked in Pearl Harbor, well, we saw that this was, we were in it right up to our eyeballs. And so maybe if we had been more vigilant and less protectionist and more engaged with the rest of the world, all of that could have been averted through diplomacy. I don't know, maybe that's revisionistic thinking, but that is a lesson. And another lesson is, more on the defensive side, be prepared.
1.4 million Japanese tourists visit Hawaii every year, but most of them stay away from Pearl Harbor. They don't come for that. They come for the climate, the beauty, the surf, the shopping, and their money is welcome since they spend far more than Americans. The Japanese real estate speculators and developers have turned the Honolulu skyline into a symbol of Japanese economic power, unsettling to some.
The people who brought you Pearl Harbor are now bringing you automobiles, are now bringing you the buyout of America. The Zeros are flying over and they're dropping Mitsubishi and they're dropping Toyota and they're dropping Nissan, or else they're dropping yen, and they're now bombing us once again. And because we underestimated them in the 1950s and 60s and 70s, we thought they were still little men. Now we're surprised. We're caught by surprise again.
This country will never forget Pearl Harbor, never. Pearl Harbor remains the secret fear of government in this country, being surprised. But that's the past now. I don't think you can hold the sons responsible for the sins of their fathers and their grandfathers forever. You just can't do it.
We still, in some hidden recesses of our mind, think of Japan as the vanquished in a war, that somehow that arrogance that we had prior to Pearl Harbor still exists in our inner soul, and that we are somehow better than the Japanese.
Obviously, the Americans have not forgotten, and for many Americans, Pearl Harbor would be one way of characterizing Japanese behavior, Japanese policy. It suggests all kinds of things, and I think it's inevitable that it has colored U.S.-Japanese relations. There is no getting around it.
I hope it doesn't have kind of a stereotypical ugliness about it in a context that lingers over from Pearl Harbor and from our being enemies, because we're friends now. And anything that smacks of prejudice as you express your differences on international trade on either side is totally unacceptable.
These differences lead us to minor issues such as bashing, which we see today. Of course, one side would say, we are not bashing, we have no intention of doing that. On the other hand, the other side might say, we're getting bashed. The perception gap, I think, still exists today. So we really have to examine why this gap has been created and where this has come from, knowing we have so many means to be able to communicate with each other.
As an epical event in history, Pearl Harbor still fascinates historians. But it is a personal recollection and experience only for those who were here at the time, and there are fewer of them every day.
As for Pearl Harbor, I still regard it as an honor to have been in the first attack group. I was truly a happy man. I don't tell anybody about these feelings, but deep in my heart, I always think of myself as a really happy man.
The lessons of Pearl Harbor is that we hope America remembers Pearl Harbor so it never happens again. And the basic part of it is to keep America alert. And if we can leave that legacy to our children and our grandchildren and the people that run the country, then those who passed away, I can get corny and say they shall not have died in vain.
It's our responsibility to tell our true history honestly. We should tell our people what we did. How they interpret it depends on their own wisdom. The war was a mistake, and what Japan did was wrong. Motivated by excessive regret and shame, our schools avoid teaching about the war and omit the dark side of our history.
For the veterans that fought in Europe and fought in the Pacific, they will never forget World War II.
If we are able to embrace Germans and not constantly remind them of Hitler, which we don't, then we should be able to do something close to that with the Japanese.
When I look back on the past, the first thing I think is that it was such a high price to pay to learn a lesson about peace. and it should never be repeated.
One of the Japanese tourists came up and he was about my age. He pounded his chest. He says, "I'm Japanese. I'm Japanese." And I stepped back. I thought maybe we were going to have World War III there, but he looked at me and he put his hand on my shoulder and he says, "I'm very sorry." And he put his other hand on my shoulder and he says, "I'm so sorry. I'm so sorry." And we shook hands, and then he embraced me, and it made me feel like, gee, the war is really over, you know, after all of these years.